The Collins estate had always looked impressive from the outside, a mansion of stone and glass set against the changing colors of a New York autumn. But on that crisp morning, beneath the golden light of October, it seemed less like a home and more like a monument to loneliness. Inside, the silence carried its own weight. In the cavernous kitchen, Emma Rivera moved quietly, polishing the oak dining table until it gleamed. She had been working here only 4 months, long enough to know the rhythm of the house and the habits of its master, Richard Collins. She was a housekeeper, nothing more. Yet each day, she found herself filling gaps that could not be measured in dusting or laundry. The boy was one of them. Ethan Collins, 8 years old, too small for the burdens he carried. His mother had died suddenly just months earlier, leaving a wound that no inheritance could heal. Emma had seen grief before, but on Ethan it looked sharper, more delicate. He often appeared at her side with drawings clutched in his hands, or a shy question, or a smile that flickered and died too quickly. Richard, meanwhile, had responded to tragedy in the only way he knew how, by burying himself in business. Deals, calls, late nights in the study. He told himself that productivity was strength, but in truth, each new contract seemed only to make his son quieter. And so, in a moment of strange logic, Richard devised a plan. He would bring 5 women, successful, elegant, and from families as wealthy as his own, into his home. They would stay for 30 days. And at the end, Ethan would choose which one should become his new mother. It sounded efficient, even reasonable in Richard's boardroom mind. But life, Emma knew, was not a boardroom. She told herself she had no role in this theater. She was staff, invisible. And yet, the thought of Ethan forced to smile at strangers unsettled her more than she cared to admit. That morning, the quiet was broken by the low purr of engines. Emma froze, still holding her cloth, and peered out the kitchen window. The gates had opened. One after another, luxury cars rolled into the drive, polished steel reflecting the autumn sun. The arrivals were deliberate, staged as if for a performance. The first to emerge was Sofia Delgado, her navy blue dress sharp against the pale stone of the house. She carried herself with the authority of a courtroom, every step clipped and purposeful. Next came Clara Hastings, a surgeon renowned in cosmetic circles. She wore white, a shade too pure to be accidental, her smile radiant but her eyes calculating. From the third car stepped Vanessa Bloom, an architect with awards enough to fill a wall. Her black jumpsuit was daring, her gaze already sweeping the mansion as if sketching alterations in her mind. The fourth arrival was Olivia Kerr, an influencer in a blazing red dress, her hair perfectly curled for the benefit of any camera that might be watching. Even the neighbors across the street received one of her practiced smiles. Last came Isabella Cruz, daughter of a media dynasty, her champagne gown shimmering, her necklace of diamonds catching the sun. She walked as if the driveway itself belonged to her. From her vantage point behind the glass, Emma felt suddenly erased. Against such spectacle, she was nothing more than a maid with a rag in her hand. Upstairs, Richard stood with his son at the window. "They're here," he said quietly. "The women I told you about." Ethan pressed against his father's sleeve. "They're really staying here? For a whole month?" "Yes," Richard answered, firm and unyielding. "At the end, you will choose." The boy's eyes widened, but he said nothing more. Downstairs, the butler moved to greet the guests, ushering them into the grand hall where the chandelier blazed like a declaration of wealth. It didn't take long for the masks to slip. Sophia was the first to speak, her voice smooth and confident. "Richard, the house is magnificent. Your taste is impeccable." Clara followed, her smile thinner. Her gaze slid toward Emma, who had just entered carrying a tray of glasses. Clara lowered her voice, though not enough. "Though your staff seems a little clumsy." Emma's hand trembled. A glass tilted, spilling a few drops on the table. Olivia gave a soft laugh, exchanging a glance with Sophia. "Well," she murmured, "a maid will always be just a maid." The words hung in the air. Before Emma could retreat, Ethan rushed forward, picking up a napkin. "It's okay, Emma. I'll help." His small hands dabbed at the spill with fierce determination. The 5 women exchanged looks, surprise, disapproval, even irritation. Richard stepped forward, his voice cold. "This is Emma Rivera. She has cared for this home these past months. I expect her to be treated with respect. Sophia raised an eyebrow, then forced a smile. Of course, we all want everything to be perfect, don't we? But the tension lingered. Emma lowered her gaze, her knuckles white around the cloth. She knew then what these women saw her as, a threat, however small. And the 30 days ahead would not be peaceful. From that evening, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. Once quiet, it now felt like a stage. Every glance calculated, every word sharpened. Emma could feel the weight of their eyes on her as she went about her duties. She had not chosen to compete with them. Yet, unwillingly, she had been cast into the role of adversary. The first nights in the Collins mansion were quiet on the surface, but silence has its own tone. It was no longer the hush of grief. Now it carried the sharpness of rivalry. The 5 women had taken up residence in the guest suites, each room lavishly prepared, each occupant convinced she was one step closer to becoming Mrs. Collins. Emma, by contrast, continued her routines. She dusted, polished, cooked, and retreated to her modest quarters in the staff wing. Yet she could feel the shift in the air. Her presence was now an inconvenience. It wasn't something Richard had arranged deliberately, but the women saw it plainly. The boy clung to her, trusted her, smiled for her. And in this unusual competition, affection was the only currency that mattered. Small wars. The first strike came quietly. On the second morning, Emma had just finished scrubbing the grand staircase when Vanessa appeared with a porcelain cup in hand. The architect walked slowly, admiring the space, then tilted the cup ever so slightly. Drops of coffee stained the steps Emma had polished minutes earlier. "Oh dear," Vanessa said, feigning dismay. "What a shame. I suppose you'll need to start all over again." Emma bent down silently to wipe the mess. But before she could answer, Ethan came running from the landing above. His small voice rang sharp in the empty hall. "You did that on purpose." The room froze. Vanessa crouched, patting his head with false sweetness. "Sweetheart, children sometimes imagine things. Adults don't make clumsy mistakes like that." But Ethan pushed her hand away and moved to stand beside Emma, his jaw set with a defiance far too old for his years. The following day, Clara Hastings staged her own performance. She placed a crystal vase near the edge of the living room table, then brushed against it as Emma passed. The vase toppled, water splashing across the polished floor. Clara's voice rose in practiced indignation. "Be careful. You shook the table before I even set it down properly." Emma knelt, cloth in hand, the sting of injustice burning behind her eyes. Olivia, lounging nearby, added with a languid smile, "A house of this caliber deserves staff who know how to handle fragile things." Just then Richard entered. He found Emma on the floor with the broken vase, Clara standing elegantly to the side. "What happened here?" "Nothing," Clara said quickly, her tone now light, innocent. "Just an accident." Suspicion flickered in Richard's expression, but he said no more. Emma pressed her lips together and finished cleaning in silence. The Council of 5. In the afternoons, while Emma worked in the shadows, the 5 women gathered on the terrace, sipping tea from porcelain cups. Their conversations were polite enough on the surface, but carried the tone of strategy meetings. "I'm planning a trip to Disney World," Olivia said with a satisfied smile. "Children always love it." Sophia adjusted her sunglasses, her voice crisp. "Education matters more. I've already made inquiries with the top private schools in the city." Vanessa tapped her manicured nails against her cup. "Spaces shape minds. I could redesign his bedroom. Give him something modern, sophisticated. It would make him feel more grown up." Clara lifted her chin. "Health comes first. I've booked appointments with one of the best pediatricians in New York." Isabella leaned back lazily, her diamond necklace catching the light. "And what of connections? This boy needs a mother who can open doors. I have influence in media. His future would be limitless." They spoke as if Ethan were a project, an investment portfolio waiting to be optimized. None of them mentioned the simple moments that had brought the boy back to life. Emma's quiet patience, her silly origami animals, the small meals she coaxed him to eat when he lost his appetite. Richard's doubt. At night, Richard retreated to his study, where ledgers and contracts lay untouched on the desk. Instead, his thoughts turned to his son. The women performed beautifully in his presence, polished, smiling, endlessly attentive. Yet when Emma appeared, something in Ethan changed. His face lit up, his voice carried laughter, his body no longer folded in on itself. One evening, Richard asked cautiously, "What do you think of our guests?" Ethan hesitated, eyes downcast. "They're pretty. They give me gifts. But they're not like Emma." Richard leaned closer. "Not like her. How?" The boy bit his lip, struggling to explain. "When you're in the room, they smile. But when you leave, they look at me different. Emma, she's always the same." Richard fell silent. The words of an 8-year-old carried more weight than the polished speeches of any adult. The breaking point. It was on the 7th day that tension boiled over. Emma was preparing lunch when raised voices echoed from the hall. She stepped out to see Isabella holding up a silk dress smeared with tomato sauce. "You did this." Isabella snapped, pointing straight at her. "You've ruined my gown." Emma froze, stunned. She hadn't touched the dress. Ethan's voice cut through the room. "It wasn't Emma. I saw you. You dropped the plate yourself." Silence followed. Isabella's cheeks flushed. She recovered quickly, brushing it off. Children imagine things. Richard appeared in the doorway. His gaze swept the scene. Emma pale, Ethan defiant, Isabella flustered. He said nothing, only instructed Emma to continue her work. But inside, the seed of doubt grew stronger. That evening, Emma sat in the small, dim staff room. Her calloused hands rested in her lap as she asked herself the question she had been avoiding. Do I really belong here? Outside, laughter drifted from the grand hall, where the 5 women played their roles with ease. The distance between her world and theirs felt unbridgeable. Then the door creaked open. Ethan slipped inside, holding a paper crane he had folded from notebook paper. "Emma," he whispered, "I made this for you. Don't be sad, okay? I need you." Tears blurred her vision as she pulled him into her arms. She had no illusions about the weeks ahead. They would be cruel, but for Ethan's sake, she would endure. The pact. Meanwhile, the 5 women gathered again in the living room, their voices low but edged with steel. "Let's be honest," Sophia began. "The boy is too attached to Emma. If this continues, none of us will stand a chance." "Exactly," Vanessa said. "Every time she walks in, his face lights up. I've never seen a child show affection so openly." Olivia swirled her wine, sighing. "She's just a maid, but she acts like family. The boy confuses service with love." Clara smirked. "The problem is Richard sees it too. He hasn't said anything, but it's written in his eyes." "Then it's simple," Isabella concluded, her voice sharp. "We make her understand her place. A servant doesn't compete with us." Their gazes locked, a quiet agreement forming. A secret alliance was born that night, one designed not to win Ethan's heart, but to push Emma out of the picture entirely. By the second week, the Collins mansion no longer felt like a home. It was an arena, silent by day and seething by night. The 5 women, once competitors, had found common cause in their resentment of Emma Rivera. What began as spilled coffee and broken vases was no longer enough. If she remained, none of them stood a chance. So they plotted. A calculated fall. It started with staged accidents, meant to make her look careless. Vanessa carried a small can of paint into the foyer and tripped. White streaks spilled across the marble floor. "Oh no," she said with exaggerated distress. "Emma, look what you've done." But Ethan had been watching from the stairs. "You spilled it. I saw you." Vanessa crouched, smiling with teeth. "Sweetheart, children misremember things." Emma, cloth in hand, caught Ethan's furious gaze and shook her head gently. It wasn't worth the fight. He fell silent, though his fists remained clenched. Later that day, Clara dropped a jar of salt across the kitchen floor. "How clumsy of me," she sighed, just as Richard walked in. "Perhaps your staff needs more training." Emma swept in silence, her face calm, but her heart heavy. Each accident chipped away at her dignity, while the women's whispers grew bolder. The smear. By the 3rd week, Sophia had grown impatient. "Small inconveniences won't be enough," she told the others during one of their evening gatherings in the lounge. She tapped her manicured finger against a glass. "We need something undeniable." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "I have friends in the tabloids. If rumors spread that Emma is trying to seduce Richard, they'll stick. Once her name is tarnished, it won't matter whether it's true." Isabella smirked. "We can do better. Hire someone. A private investigator. Dig up a past, or if nothing exists, invent one. Wealthy men don't tolerate scandal near their children." Vanessa raised her glass. Then it's decided. We destroy her reputation. Once she's disgraced, Richard will have no choice but to send her away. They clink their glasses, their pact sealed. The arrival of lies. Days later, a man in a tailored suit appeared at the mansion, briefcase in hand. He introduced himself as a private investigator. Richard received him in the study. "Mr. Collins," the man said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "This contains the history of your employee, Emma Rivera." Richard flipped through the pages. Words leapt from the paper: fired for theft, accusations of inappropriate behavior with children, insubordination, unstable character. He frowned. The dates didn't align. Some signatures looked suspiciously similar. But the accusations were damning enough that any outsider might believe them. The investigator bowed and left. Richard sat alone, the weight of the folder pressing against his chest. If even part of it were true, he would have to protect his son. And yet, in 4 months, he had seen nothing but patience, kindness, and sincerity from Emma. Could it all have been an act? The village whispers. Emma noticed the change first outside the mansion. On her way to the market, she felt eyes linger too long. 2 women whispered as she passed. A man across the street shook his head. At the grocery counter, the cashier offered a stiff, false smile. By the time she returned, she understood. Rumors had spread. She was now the villain in some cruel story. A fraud, a thief, a dangerous influence on children. When Ethan heard fragments of it from the staff, his small body trembled with anger. He ran to her, burying his face in her apron. "Emma, are they saying bad things about you? I heard someone call you a liar." She stroked his hair, her voice steady though her throat burned. "They're just rumors, sweetheart. Don't listen." But inside, she felt the sting of exile. That night, in the women's lounge, Sophia raised her glass with satisfaction. High society never forgives a dirty past. "Tomorrow the tabloids will publish it," Olivia added with a smile. "Then she'll be finished." Isabella leaned back, triumphant. "And Richard will have no choice but to choose one of us. The game is almost over." Richard's suspicion. But upstairs in his study, Richard wasn't celebrating. He turned the forged pages under his desk lamp, studying every detail. The more he read, the more absurd they became. Emma Rivera, accused of theft? Yet she handled his finances daily without error. Neglectful toward children? He recalled her sitting with Ethan for hours, coaxing him through homework, folding paper cranes, comforting him when grief made him cry at night. If this was all an act, then she was the greatest actress alive. His instincts told him otherwise. The next morning, Richard began making calls. "Hello, this is Richard Collins. I'm calling about a former employee, Emma Rivera." The first voice, a mother of 2, answered with warmth. "Emma? She's an angel. She cared for my children for 2 years. We cried when she left." "Why do you ask?" Another call, a doctor. "Emma worked in my clinic. One of the most honest, dedicated people I've met. Anyone speaking ill of her is lying." Call after call confirmed the same. Trustworthy, kind, gentle, not a single complaint. Richard leaned back in his chair, sweat beading at his temples. He whispered to himself, "Then the papers are forged." Eavesdropping. That evening, walking down the corridor, Richard paused near the living room. Voices drifted through the half-closed door. Vanessa's tone was smug. "The rumors have spread everywhere. Soon Emma won't have a place here." Olivia chuckled. "Richard won't risk scandal. He'll have to send her away." Sophia's voice followed, confident. "That's the rule of our world. Once your reputation is stained, it's over." Heat rose in Richard's face. He had suspected, but now he knew. It was them. These 5 women had orchestrated everything. The accidents, the whispers, the lies. He returned to his study, heart heavy, mind sharp. If he confronted them now, they would deny it. He needed to wait. Let them believe they had won. Only then could he reveal the truth. Ethan's fear. That night, Ethan knocked on his father's door. In his hands was another folded paper crane. His eyes were wide, filled with fear. "Dad," he whispered. "They said Emma's going to be sent away. Is it true?" Richard pulled him close, steadying his voice. "Listen to me, son. Emma isn't going anywhere. But I need time to prove it. Do you trust me?" Ethan nodded, wrapping his arms around his father. "I trust you. But please, don't let them take her." And in that moment, Richard understood. This was no longer about pride or appearances. It was about keeping his son's trust intact. If he lost that, he lost everything. Richard Collins was a man who had learned to win battles by patience. In the corporate world, it meant letting rivals overplay their hand before striking. In his private life, it now meant something darker, pretending to believe lies in order to expose them. From the day he overheard the women's voices in the living room, his strategy changed. He would no longer defend Emma openly. Instead, he would play the role of a man swayed by scandal, a father protecting his son from impropriety. He would make them careless, confident, certain of their victory. And then he would strike. A cruel announcement. The trap began at dinner. The chandelier glowed warmly above the long table, the women seated in practiced elegance, Ethan fidgeting beside Emma. Richard raised his glass, his voice heavy with deliberation. "I've been thinking," he began. "Perhaps everyone is right. Maybe Emma shouldn't be so close to Ethan." The words landed like a blade. Emma froze mid-step, the serving tray trembling in her hands. Ethan's spoon clattered to the table. Sophia's lips curved into a polished smile. "Richard, at last you see reason. Children need role models with education and status. Not." Her eyes flicked toward Emma. "A housemaid." Emma lowered her head, swallowing the tears burning her throat. Ethan stood abruptly, his small voice trembling but fierce. "No, Emma isn't just a maid. She loves me." The women exchanged glances, some feigning pity, others annoyance. Olivia leaned forward, her tone falsely gentle. "Ethan, sometimes adults make choices for your good. You'll understand when you're older." "Sit down," Richard said sharply, tapping his spoon against the plate. "This is an adult matter." But the boy's voice rose louder. "I don't want a new mother. I only want Emma." Emma turned away, unable to meet his gaze. In her heart, Richard's words weren't strategy, they were betrayal. That night, she retreated to her narrow staff room and let her grief finally break free. Ethan's ultimatum. Later, Ethan crept into her room, eyes red from crying. He crawled into her arms, whispering into her shoulder. "Emma, don't go. I don't need anyone else. I only need you." Her tears dampened his hair. "But your father has decided, sweetheart. Maybe I should leave." Ethan shook his head violently. "If you go, I'll go too." Emma pulled back, horrified. "No, Ethan. You must stay with your father. He needs you." In the quiet, she thought only one thing. If this is my fate, I'll accept it. But no one can take away Ethan's love. That, at least, is mine. The celebration of enemies. Meanwhile, in the grand lounge, the women toasted with wine. Vanessa laughed, her voice sharp with triumph. "See? Richard believes us now. Emma has no chance." Isabella smirked. "At last, the maid knows her place." Clara whispered, her smile tight and gleaming. "Now it's just us. One of us will soon be Mrs. Collins." Their laughter rang through the hall, echoing down corridors like a victory march. They didn't know it was part of Richard's theater, and that the stage was being prepared for their downfall. The night before, as the final day approached, the mansion hummed with anticipation. Invitations had been sent, the hall decorated with flowers and linens. Friends, relatives, and business partners would all attend, expecting to witness the boy's choice of a new mother. Emma kept to the kitchen, her movements mechanical, her heart heavy as stone. She told herself she would finish her duties and then leave quietly, before anyone could see her go. The women, on the other hand, spent hours with stylists and gowns. Each rehearsed her smile, her entrance, her imagined triumph. To them, the evening would end with applause, champagne, and victory. But to Richard, it was the moment to close the trap. Father and son. The night before the gathering, Richard entered the library, where Ethan sat curled on the leather couch. The boy clutched yet another folded paper crane, his eyes clouded with worry. "Dad," he asked quietly, "will they really make me choose?" Richard sat beside him, his voice calm but steady. "Yes, son. Tomorrow you will stand before everyone. But remember, the choice is yours alone." Ethan looked down at his hands. "Then I choose Emma, even if no one else wants her." Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be brave tomorrow. Say what's in your heart. And I promise you, the truth will come to light." Ethan nodded, determination glimmering through his sadness. For a moment, Richard felt the weight of fatherhood more acutely than he had in years. He had risked too much, let grief make him cold. Now, everything depended on his son's courage and his own ability to prove the truth. The eve of reckoning. That night, the mansion slept uneasily. In her small room, Emma whispered silent prayers, her suitcase half-packed beneath the bed. Upstairs, the five women dreamed of jewels, headlines, and the power of becoming Richard Collins's wife. In the master suite, Richard lay awake, replaying every detail of his plan, the evidence ready, the stage set. The storm would break tomorrow. And when it did, masks would fall, reputations would crumble, and the fate of the Collins family would be decided not by wealth or schemes, but by a child's voice. The Collins mansion had never looked more radiant. Florists had woven the hallways with white lilies and pale roses. Linens lay crisp as fresh snow, and a chandelier blazed over the grand hall like a small sun. Guests arrived in waves. Investors, family friends, discreet reporters who promised to behave, and neighbors who did not. They came to witness a tidy ending. A boy would choose, a widow's place would be filled, and a household would steady itself. In the kitchen, Emma kept moving. Plates, trays, cutlery, everything in its proper place. She told herself she would slip away after the last dish left the pass. No goodbyes. No scene. She would depart as she had arrived, quietly. The five contenders entered like a procession. Sophia in severe black velvet, Clara in a gown that shimmered like frost, Vanessa in a flame-red jumpsuit that refused to be ignored, Olivia in ocean blue, Isabella in molten gold. They worked the room with practiced grace. Kisses in the air, a laugh here, a compliment there. Each certain the evening would end with a victory posed for photographs. Richard appeared at last on a small dais, Ethan beside him. The boy clutched his father's sleeve, chin lifted in a show of bravery that had cost him a week of sleep. Richard's voice, when it carried across the room, was steady. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. These past 30 days have been unconventional, but I wanted my son to feel he had a say in his future. He paused, allowing the murmur to fade. As promised, tonight Ethan will choose. A hush fell. Cameras lowered. Even the chandelier seemed to soften its glare. Ethan glanced up at his father, then stepped forward. His voice came small at first, then strengthened. I don't choose anyone. He swallowed. I only want Emma. The room exhaled in a single startled breath. Heads turned. The guests to the dais to the kitchen door where Emma stood frozen, a tray in her hand she no longer felt. Sophia moved first, her smile taut. Ethan, darling, you're young. Emma is staff. What you need is a mother, an example. She's better than all of you. The boy's words cut the sentence clean in half. Richard raised a hand for calm. Before we continue, I have something to show you. The lights dimmed. A screen lowered at the back of the hall. For a heartbeat, the room was dark enough for everyone to hear their own misgivings. Then the first video flickered to life. Vanessa, in the foyer, tilting a paint can with that small, insincere, oh dear, already on her face. Replayed at a different angle, the deliberate tip, the smear, the practiced shock. Another clip, Clara setting a crystal vase near the edge of the table and accidentally brushing it over, the resulting mess framed by her feigned concern. Then Olivia's mouth forming the words, just a maid, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Audio from a private corner, the lounge, where voices overlapped. The rumors have spread. Richard won't risk scandal. Once a reputation is stained, it's over. Isabella's laugh at the end of that line was a nail on glass. When the lights returned, they did not flatter. Faces had lost their polish. Guests looked not at Richard but at the five women, and their silence was an indictment. Richard lifted a folder. Over the last week, a so-called investigator delivered this, he said, his tone precise. It claims Emma Rivera was fired for theft, mistreated children, and left a trail of misconduct. I called every family she's worked for. Every single one described her as honest, steady, and kind. These documents are forged. No one moved. Pride has a posture. Guilt has none. Ethan could not be restrained by ceremony another second. He ran to Emma and wrapped his arms around her waist. I want her to be my mom, he said, louder now. The plea turned into a decision. For a long moment, Emma could only stand there, the boy's heartbeat thudding against her. She looked up and met Richard's eyes across the room. Something in his expression, relief mixed with resolve, pulled her forward. Richard stepped down from the dais. The folder fell away like discarded armor. He stopped in front of her, the crowd a blur beyond the circle they formed with Ethan. "Emma Rivera," he said, and his voice carried without effort. "You have given my son back his laughter. And somewhere along the way you reminded me I still had a life to live." He lowered to one knee as a small velvet box appeared in his hand. Gasps rolled through the hall like a tide. "Will you marry me and be Ethan's mother?" The tray Emma had been holding slipped, caught by a quick-footed server who deserved a raise. Tears came without shame. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth and nodded. Once, then again when she found her breath. "Yes," she managed, the word breaking and still somehow whole. Applause erupted, the kind that starts scattered and becomes a single sound. Some guests wiped their eyes. Others looked very interested in their shoes. The 5 women moved as a unit toward the exit, pale, silent, suddenly aware that the door was farther away than it had looked on arrival. By the next morning, the story had run the circuit. Tabloids that had toyed with gossip pivoted to absolution. The video played on morning shows. Talk radio invented morals. High society, which treats scandal like weather, tolerated when predicted, unforgivable when it ruins one's shoes, responded accordingly. Sophia took a leave to focus on family. Clara's appointment book thinned. Vanessa's largest project suspended consultations, pending review. Olivia's followers fled in droves for having mistaken cruelty for content. Isabella found that media empires have boards, and boards prize discretion over lineage. The Collins household, meanwhile, grew quiet in the best way. The wedding was small and untheatrical, sun through stained glass, vows spoken without tremor, a ring-bearer named Ethan concentrating so hard he might have been landing a plane. When Emma came down the aisle in white, there was no question she belonged where she was. Time did what it does best, it moved. 2 years later, the garden wore late spring like a smile. Emma sat on a bench with an infant sleeping against her shoulder, a girl they named Sophia Collins, for the life she brought back into the house rather than any social rival she had outlasted. Ethan, now 10, ran circles around the lawn and stopped every so often to touch the baby's fingers with reverence, as if tenderness could be taught by contact alone. Richard walked across the grass with that tired, happy look of men who have finally put the right things at the center of their days. "Are you happy?" he asked, already knowing. "More than I imagined I could be," Emma said, and meant it. The mansion did not get smaller, but it felt less like a monument and more like a home. Laughter traveled further than footsteps. Paper cranes still appeared on windowsills, though now they were joined by crude drawings of a family of 3 that had, by miracle, become 4. 5 years after that, the yard, generous as ever, hummed with childhood. Little Sophia, 5 today, insisted on wearing a crown of pink plastic jewels to chase butterflies. Her brother Gabriel, 3, all curiosity and mud, planted himself by the vegetable beds and conducted serious conversations with earthworms. Ethan, 13, taller now and unreasonably patient, moved between them like a tether, steadying, explaining, shepherding. Emma sat beneath the old maple, the baby's laughter skittering like sunlight through leaves. Richard came down the steps with a basket of fruit balanced in one hand and kissed the top of her head as if it were a ritual at which luck never failed. They had, all of them, ceased to think of the 5 women. Now and then a name surfaced in gossip, softened by distance. Success is a mountain range, and people get lost behind it in both directions. But in this house, history had been given a closed door. That evening, they ate at the long table that had once felt like a border and now felt like a gathering place. Little Sophia described kindergarten justice with legal precision. Gabriel declared himself a dragon and scattered peas with appropriate menace. Ethan cleared plates without being asked. Richard lifted his glass. "To us," he said. 5 years ago, no one would have bet on this." Emma touched her glass to his. "It wasn't luck," she answered. "It was trust." "And not giving up," Ethan added, suddenly shy about the earnestness of his own voice. They laughed. The chandelier glowed. Beyond the windows, the maples shifted in the evening breeze, and the mansion exhaled the last of a history it no longer needed to carry. Some stories end with thunder. This one did not. It ended with a routine that finally felt like a gift. A child's voice at the top of the stairs, the rustle of a newspaper no one read past the headlines, the clink of cutlery, a bench in the garden, A paper crane on a windowsill. A family made not by design, but by the courage to tell the truth and live with its consequences. Love had not been bought, nor auditioned, nor chosen from a lacquered row. It had been recognized and then defended. That was all, and it was enough.